Hello and welcome to Theology Unleashed. Sorry for the delay. It was a bit of a mix-up on the times. So today we're having a discussion between two academics. Both of them are trained philosophers. They work as professors. The topic today is the Hare Krishna conception of God, a Western perspective. Our two guests are Dr. Ryan Mullins and Dr. Ricardo Silvestre. I haven't memorized their bios, so they're in the description, but I'll just get each of them to introduce themselves. So looks like Ricardo's frozen. So let's start with Dr. Ryan Mullins. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Dr. Mullins. I'm at the University of Helsinki. I'm a part of this thing called the Collegium for Advanced Studies, which is sort of like an interdisciplinary institute for lots of different things. My first book was called The End of the Timeless God, which was in 2016, which looked at the concept of divine timelessness and if God could be timeless. The University of Helsinki. The second book, this thing called, and then, I'm just hearing a big delay. Did you hear that as well?
Oh, did it play back for you? Oh, okay. Must have that set to play back. Sorry, I was just checking the sound. I didn't realize it was coming back through. Okay.
It's okay. So then where was I? Oh yeah. So the second book that I did was called God in Emotion, which just came out a few months ago, which just looks at what exactly would God's emotional life be like if God exists. And then right now I'm working on a book called From Divine Time Maker to Divine Watchmaker, which is looking at the claim that if God's temporal, what does that mean? And trying to look at some different models of God to figure out how to flesh out that sort of story.
Okay, cool. It looks like we're missing Ricardo. Let's hope he comes back. Do you want to start giving some context for the sort of dialectical context, the language used for discussing conceptions of God and stuff, maybe then?
Sure. So as I understand things, there's what's called the concept of God, and then there are particular models or conceptions of God. So as I see things, the concept of God is that God is an absolutely perfect being who is the foundation of reality. And what a model of God tries to do is try to give you a thicker conception of what that is. So they're going to try to articulate and develop two different things. So one, what does it mean to say that God is perfect? And then two, what does it mean to say that God's the foundation of ultimate reality? Because there's lots of different ways to kind of spell that out. And so as I understand things, there's like 5 main models of God that I think are being, you can see across the world's religions, which are something you might call like classical theism, neoclassical theism, or modified classical theism, depending on the label, open theism, and then panentheism and pantheism. And so one of the things I think that is pertinent for today is how they cash out the claim that God is the foundation of reality. So classical theism, neoclassical theism, and open theism, they're going to affirm a doctrine of creation out of nothing. Whereas panentheism and pantheism, those views typically deny the doctrine of creation out of nothing, and instead are going to affirm either some kind of like emanation scheme or an eternal creation, something like that. And those two sort of views are more common in Hindu traditions, because Hindu traditions usually don't affirm creation out of nothing. But you can find people in Western religious traditions within Islam and Christianity and Judaism who are going to affirm panentheism and deny creation out of nothing. So I think that's a potential area of disagreement and also overlap, depending on which thinker you're looking at in each tradition.
Cool, thanks for that. All right, we've got Ricardo back. So Dr. Ricardo Silvestre, could you please give us a brief introduction about yourself?
All right, so I work in Brazil. I work in the field that some people call formal philosophy or logical philosophy. And I've been working for some years in a kind of new field. We call it logic and religion. We try to bring those two things together. Logic on one side, reason or formal reason, as you will. And on the other side, religion, but mainly philosophy of religion. So I have added a couple of special issues on this topic. I also help organizing a series of conference called World Congress on Logic and Religion. We had 2 editions, one in Brazil in 2015, another in Poland in 2017. And our third one will be in India, in Varanasi. Yeah, that's it. So, but I'm also a practitioner. I'm Hare Krishna, you might say. And because of that, I have a natural interest in Indian religion, but I'm not an expert. More than anything, I'm a logician. And I have also some interest in the philosophy of religion, in the analytic tradition.
Cool. All right. And then we can just launch right into it. So, sorry, that's not really play. Sorry. Okay. So, Ricardo, do you want to give us your thesis?
Is this all right? I don't know if it is a thesis. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation and congratulations for the initiative. I think that's a very, very important topic. I would say even a pressing one. As I said, I work in that field, some people say boring field, called formal philosophy, where almost everything is followed by a definition. But besides that, I come from computer science. My undergrad and master's degree were in computer science, but my PhD was in philosophy. And of course, in computer science, we need to define things, otherwise things won't work. And in formal philosophy, and even in analytic philosophy, we prioritize clarity and precision, when to be sure about the meaning of our key terms. So I'm pretty much used to definitions. But on the theological side, it seems to me that we don't need that much clarity and precision. I mean, I'm talking about like our daily life as a practitioner. But of course, if you want to evaluate our the key terms, the key beliefs, the key thesis of our tradition, then we need precision, we need clarity. So to bring those two things together.
Sorry, don't worry.
Sorry,
I stopped it. Just continue.
Okay, so I think to bring those two things together and try to talk about what you are calling the Hare Krishna concept of God, I think it's pretty much welcome. Not only welcome, but needed. Mainly if we really succeed in doing what you wrote in the description, that we are going to evaluate this Hare Krishna concept of God. We're going to point out their virtues, their vices, and so on and so forth. Okay, and I'd like to talk about your title, if you allow me. The title is A Western Perspective on the Hare Krishna Conception of God, or the Hare Krishna concept of God, as I prefer to call it. And in the description, we find that we are supposed here to discuss the Chaitanya Vaishnava concept of God, its virtues and vices, and compare it to Western conceptions. So I'd like to make 2 remarks about that, about the title and about what we find in the description of the YouTube video. Of course, there are a couple of approaches one can adopt at the time of appraising or analyzing a concept. We can do that from a psychological point of view, from a sociological point of view, and also from a philosophical point of view. That's the way I understand it. And I'd like to follow, I think that's the approach we are going to follow here. I'd like to follow a philosophical approach. So perhaps in this way we can understand the title of the discussion as a philosophical perspective on the Hare Krishna concept of God. But as I said, one of our goals is to evaluate a specific concept of God, the Hare Krishna concept of God. But it seems to me that in order to do that, in order to evaluate this or any other concept of God, we need to have some criteria according to which specific features of these concepts are to be classified as virtues or as vices. It seems to me that if these criteria are not clearly defined, the whole discussion is in danger of being fruitless. So I'll try to divide my talk. I really don't know how much time I have. I will try to be very, very brief, but I will try to divide my contribution into two parts. So in the first part, I will say some words about what I understand as being a philosophical perspective on a specific concept of God. And I will propose a very simple theoretical framework within which concepts of God can be evaluated. So that's the first remark, and also corresponds to a kind of first part of my talk. And the second remark is about the Hare Krishna part of the title. That's very important. And about the Chaitanya Vaishnava part of the video description. So the Hare Krishna movement, or ISKCON, which is an acronym for International Society for Krishna Consciousness, is, as we call it, a new religious movement that started in the 60s in the US and quickly became a worldwide religion. Its theology goes back to the medieval Indian mystic known as Sri Krishna Chaitanya. He was born in 1486 and died in 1534. And this theology is rooted in the Vedantic and Puranic literature, which goes back to at least 4,000 years. So the literature is really huge, and it's difficult to, from a scholarly point of view, to present a specific book as being the Hare Krishna Bible. But if you had to do that, certainly three texts would appear at the beginning of our list: the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavatam Purana, and the medieval hagiography of Sri Chaitanya, which was written by a theologian and mystic called Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami in 1557, which is called Chaitanya Charitamrita. But this is very important because, differently from other Vedantic concepts of God, like the concept of God associated with the tradition of Shankara, of Madhva, or Ramanuja, as far as I know, there is no work aimed at philosophically reconstructing the concept of God of the Chaitanya tradition. Of course, we find many things about this concept of God in these several texts. But as far as I know, there is no work which tries to get all those things together and say, like, this is the Hare Krishna concept of God, or this is the Chaitanya Vaishnava concept of God. I myself have not written about that. As I said, we're chatting a bit before. I'm not an expert in Indian philosophy. I searched a bit, and again, as far as I know, there is no attempt to philosophically evaluate this Chaitanya Vaishnava concept of God. And I'll not present here. I'll not even try to present here anything even remotely close to a fully developed philosophical theory. I really would like to put myself in the position of an insider. And present here what I perhaps would label as an educated guess about the issue. I'd like to try to follow this approach. So in order not to be a complete disappointment, I will narrow down the scope of my analysis and focus only on the Gita. Okay? So instead of trying to say that this is the concept of God of the Hare Krishna tradition, I will say this is the concept of God of the Bhagavad Gita, or the concept of God we find in this text, which is the Bhagavad Gita, which is it's at the same time easier and more difficult because differently from the two other texts that I mentioned, the Bhagavata Purana and the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Bhagavad Gita is a text that is important to many different traditions, and some of those traditions they have contradictory ontological claims, and they even contradict our own claims. So Bhagavad Gita is like a multi-traditional text. But anyway, it's a very important text, even for our tradition. It's an important text for all Vedanta traditions. So because I'm more familiar with this text, I would like to talk about it and only about it. So in this way, if Alex agrees, I would like to name my contribution here as a philosophical perspective on the concept of God of the Bhagavad Gita. All right, because of all that I said. So that will be the purpose of the second part of my talk. Then, before saying a little bit about what I understand as being a philosophical perspective on a specific concept of God, after that I will say a few words, and at this time I'd like to share my screen to try to clarify what we might call the concept of God of the Bhagavad Gita. Is that all right, Alex?
Yeah, I haven't done screen sharing before, but let's see how it comes in.
Not now, just later.
Okay.
Not now. I don't need to. I don't need to share it now. But I asked if it is all right if I follow this approach.
It should work fine.
Which is a bit different from what perhaps you conceived. Is all right?
Yeah. Go for it. Give your presentation.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. I was afraid that it would be a problem. Okay. So as I said, I will divide my talk into two parts. I don't know if Ryan wants to say something about the first part. If I stop between the first and second part, as I said, it will be quick. I think in 15 minutes, 20 minutes at most, I speak everything about this first part. But it's up to you if you let me finish, or if I stop between the first and the second part. You decide. All right, so in this first part, I'll try to say some few words about what I'm calling here a philosophical perspective on a concept of God. So Ryan will correct me if it is a too naive approach. He's the expert. I'm just trying to say something here, and I just thought a bit, and I came to some conclusions. So first, we have first to say, or try to say, I think, about what a concept is, because we're trying to say what a philosophical perspective on a concept of God is. But I'm sure that many people, perhaps some people who are watching this, don't know what a concept is. Ryan knows, I believe, or at least he's aware of the whole discussion about the issue, which is a big discussion. Philosophers, they don't agree yet about the question of what a concept is. But for my purpose here, I understand the concept simply as something that lies between the words and the objects to which they refer. So we have the word cat is a word, is a kind of linguistic entity, and we have the object, like the animal, which is a cat, but perhaps we'd say that in between those two things, there is the concept that the word cat expresses the concept of cat, and there are many objects which fall under the concept of cat. They are cats. Okay, I hope that's clear. That's the expression we use in philosophy, to fall under a concept. That means that it's an object which is an instance of the concept, like the animal we like a lot. I have a cat. He's my paw. And we say that those objects, they fall under the concept of cat. They have the property of being cats, and so on and so forth. Okay, now about concepts of God, or concept of God. So the first important thing to point out is that there's not only one concept of God, of course. I would say that virtually every religious tradition has its own concept of God, which and many times concepts of God, they contradict each other. But perhaps we can make like a big division of this category. We might say that there are the concepts of God of the living religious traditions, okay, because like Christianity, like the religion we're talking about, that we might call Vaishnavism, is a monotheistic religion that will be clear later. But we have the concepts of God that are found, for instance, in specific texts that the minds of the practitioners and so on and so forth. And this concept is not as clear, or these concepts, they are not as clear as we want them to be. It's not very easy to say, for instance, what is the concept of God of a specific Vaishnava tradition, say the Vaishnava tradition related to Madhva, which is a theologian from the 11th century. Just an example. And the same perhaps for Christianity, but perhaps Ryan can talk about that. One thing I know is that Christian philosophers, they are still struggling about, for instance, how to solve the so-called Trinity problem. The idea that God, like, he's one person, but he's also three people, like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And I have seen very, very different attempts to cope with this problem. And at the end, we arrive at different concepts of the Christian God. We try to solve in different ways this philosophical problem. But why this is difficult? Because we are trying to perhaps I can use this term, which is a term that was coined by German philosophy Rudolf Carnap. We are trying to reconstruct the concept. We look at different scriptures, different texts, and we try to come up with a coherent idea of what the concept of God of this specific tradition is. So I call this the God of the living religious traditions. On the other side, we have what we might call the God of the philosophers. It's not a good expression, but I will use it. We'll use it. And here we are kind of free to have our own conception of God. Of course, many of these attempts, they are linked to a specific religious tradition, but they are not like tied to them. For instance, we have Anselm's definition of what God is. We have Descartes' tradition of what God is. And although we have some indications that we find aspects of this tradition, of these definitions in Christian texts, the philosopher is free to define the God as he wishes. So I'm making this distinction here because here we are talking about the concept of God of a specific living tradition. And I suspect that this is a harder task. We are not as free as we are if you just try to philosophize about God, philosophize about, I don't know, the problem of evil, which concept of God would, for instance, solve the problem of evil. So we have a kind of freedom that it's so nice as thinkers, as philosophers. It's good to have this freedom. But if we are doing like philosophical theology, you are not as free as when you are doing philosophy of religion, say. So I think that is an important distinction because here we are going to talk about the concept of God of a specific living tradition. Okay. Another remark that I would make is really about this, what I'm calling here philosophical perspective on a concept of God. We know that one of the most important questions, philosophical questions about God, is whether or not theistic belief is rational, whether or not the belief in God is a rational belief. That's one of the most important, not the most important one, but one of the most important questions in philosophy of religion. And there are two. I mean, this question can be divided into two questions, and both of them can be stated in terms of the concept of God or in terms of a concept of God. The first question is whether or not the concept of God or a specific concept of God is coherent, is a possible concept, because many people claim and they try to demonstrate, to prove that the concept of God is like the concept of a squared circle. There can't be an object which falls under the concept of a square circle. It's an impossible concept. So many people say or try to claim that the concept of God is like that. It's an impossible concept, incoherent concept, contradictory concept. You can call it in many different ways. And of course, if the concept of God is a contradictory concept, so the belief in God is irrational. That's the first question. And there is a second one. Whether or not there is an object which falls under the concept of God or under a specific concept of God. So that's the purpose, of course, of arguments which tries to prove the existence of God. And also the purpose of arguments which try to prove the inexistence of the concept of God. They all deal with this issue, whether or not there is an object which falls under the concept of God. So I think it's interesting to point out that both of the main tasks, or two of the main tasks of what we call epistemology of religion, they can be stated in terms of the concept of God. But, and that's my proposal, and I'm really taking a risk here because I have not written about that, and it's a new idea. But we are just talking. Why not to propose it here? It seems to me that there is something in between those two things. The first thing is the issue whether or not the concept of God is coherent, or whether or not it is a contradictory concept. And the second thing is whether or not there is an object which falls under the concept of God, or whether or not there is a God. But it seems to me, again, that there is something in between those two things. And in order to explain why, I can give two examples, the example of two different concepts of God. The first concept of God, I don't mean to associate it with any tradition, okay? Think of a God which is a kind of tribal, exclusivist, and vengeful God who demands exclusive worship for himself and punishes those who do not satisfy this demand. Concept of God one. Now think of a second concept of God, a God that is forgiving, like a forgiving and compassionate Father who loves equally all human beings. So it seems to me that from a rational point of view, people will tend to reject the first concept of God, and not to resist too much at the time of accepting the first concept of God. And I'm talking here just about the concept, okay, whether or not there are evidence that there's an object which falls under the first concept or under the second concept. From merely conceptual, from a merely conceptual perspective, it seems that there's a difference between the two concepts. And you can suppose here that those two concepts, they are both consistent. They are both coherent concepts. So what lies between possibility and actuality? Of course, possibility and actuality are ontological concepts or ontological notions. But it seems to me that what lies between those two things is what we might call plausibility or likelihood. If I know that some thesis is possible, but I'm not sure if it is true or not, I can just show evidence for it and say that even though I cannot prove that the thesis is true, I can show that it is plausible. So in this way, I propose that concepts can also be plausible or likely or even probable. I'm using the word here in a broad sense. Okay, I know that it has different meanings. I know that plausibility is something we usually attach to propositions, not to concepts. But I'm taking advantage of the fact that we are talking here. We are not in an academic conference or anything like that. So and I think that's interesting because when I mentioned those two questions, which are at the center of the discussion on the rationality of theistic belief, we have that showing that the concept of God is not an impossible concept. It's like a conceptual negative criterion of rational acceptance. But showing that there is an object which falls under the concept of God or under a concept of God is like an ontological positive criterion of rational acceptance. But it seems to me that there is something in between, something like a conceptual positive criterion of rational acceptance. And I would call that like the plausibility of a concept. And I'm almost finishing this first part. And the same way as like it happens with the concept of probability, we can think of the concept of plausibility in at least three different ways. We can talk about it from a qualitative point of view. We can just say that a proposition or a concept is plausible, that's it. Or we can talk about it from a comparative point of view, saying that one proposition is more plausible than other, or one concept is more plausible than other. And we can also talk from a quantitative point of view. We can attach a number. We can say that like it happens with the concept of probability. Okay, I say that because I mean, despite being a new idea, it would be like too hard to come up with a comparative and what speak about a quantitative theory of conceptual plausibility. So I'm here. I will talk here just about I will talk about plausibility just from a qualitative point of view. So what I propose here is that this criteria to evaluate a concept or a concept of God be based on its plausibility. And it seems to me that here we should have, I think, two kinds of criteria, like general criteria to assess concepts in general. So perhaps simplicity, fruitfulness, clarity, or perhaps even external consistency, whether or not the concept is consistent with other concepts which we already accept, like concepts related to scientific theories, for instance. So it seems to me that in order for this to work, we should have like general criteria that would apply to any concept at all, but also specific criteria which would apply only to concepts of God. And I will just talk about the second kind of criteria. And it seems to me, that's my proposal here, that we should draw this criterion from what many people call perfect being theology. It's something which, yeah, it was not with this name, but the first instance of what we call perfect being theology appeared in a text by Anselm called Proslogion, where he gave that brilliant definition of God as that being the one that we cannot conceive a greater being than him, that than which nothing greater can be thought or can be conceived. So Descartes also had his own contribution for perfect being theology. Descartes defined God as that being in his meditations, that being who possesses all excellence. And of course, both in Anselm and Descartes, we find from this definition an argument that tries to prove the existence of God that we now call ontological argument. But it's the idea that God is a maximally perfect being. Like in this idea is very clear in Anselm, that God is so great that you can't even conceive a being who is greater than him. Of course, we can criticize Anselm's idea. But again, when we are talking about the concept of God, of living religious traditions, as I said, we don't have that freedom that philosophers have. So it seems to me that the plausibility of a concept of God, that's my proposal, and I will be done with my first part. So the plausibility of a concept will depend on how much it departs or how much it is close to a maximal idea of God. The idea of God is a maximally perfect being. Again, if you are just thinking, it's very easy to come up with a concept of God like that. But if you are digging in the religious texts, if you're trying to reconstruct the concept of God of living religious traditions, it's not that easy. So it's an idea, okay, of something we can use to base our evaluation of a specific concept of God. And my proposal is that we use this idea here in order to evaluate the Hare Krishna concept of God. Yes, I think it would be a good idea if I stop here and I hear from you guys before
Cool.
starting with the second part.
All right. So, Dr. Ryan Mullins, would you like to give some comments?
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I'm following along. So when I'm looking at different conceptions of God, one of the criteria is, does it really satisfy our intuitions about what a perfect being should be like?
Sure.
And then like another kind of criteria is, does it actually fit with the living tradition, the religious tradition it's saying it is? Is that like maybe like kind of two separate criteria that might be a way to test a model of God? Is that kind of the idea?
I think it's your first criterion.
Mhm.
I think it's pretty much your first criterion. I might be wrong, but it's. I have a feeling that again, when we are trying to come up with a reconstruction of a concept of God found in a living religious tradition, I think it's not that trivial that concept would be like Anselm's concept. Am I wrong?
So when I look at most religious traditions, you've got all these people trying to say like, God's perfect, God's absolutely great.
Okay.
Nobody wants to deny that.
Sure.
But then you've got people going, well, but your concept of God, he doesn't really know as much as my concept of God. So mine's greater, and then it's somebody else going, ooh, but mine's a lot more powerful. And so you get this kind of back and forth of sort of things. That's what I was trying to make sure that's what you're envisioning here is something, a dialectic a bit like that.
Yeah, something like that. But let me ask you a question, if Alex allow me. So I don't know what background you come from a Christian background.
Yes. So I'm a Christian theologian.
Okay.
But one of the things that's tricky is there are a bunch of different. There's a massive debate within Christian theology about what the best like model or conception of God is.
Sure.
So you've got some people going like, oh, God's got to be timeless, and some other people going, oh no, that's terrible. Some other people going, God's got to be impassible. He can't be moved by anything. That is well, the idea of him being loving, he's got to care about us. He's got to be moved by us. And then you've got some people who want to be pantheists that look very similar to something like Shankara. And then you've got some others who want to be panentheists. They look really close to Ramanuja, but they're all claiming to be Christian. And so it's like, this is it's a wild field.
Yeah, but I would like to ask you a question. And when we open like the companions, the handbooks on philosophy of religion, we usually find like a whole section on the concept of God, and there is a chapter on omnipotence, a chapter on simplicity, a chapter on eternity, and so on and so forth. All those divine properties, right? But my question is, to what extent we really do evidence, for instance, in the Bible, that the Christian concept of God has those properties?
Oh, do we have evidence for some of these properties?
I am asking
in the Bible? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. So my personal opinion is you can get evidence for eternity in the sense of existing without beginning, without end, but I don't think you can get timelessness. So the idea of existing without succession, I don't think you're going to find that there. The idea of divine simplicity, I don't think you can find it there at all. And so that's why there are lots of different theologians who are going to go, well, then that just shouldn't be part of the concept of God at all. The Christian God shouldn't be like that whatsoever. So so some of these divine attributes, some people are just going to say no biblical evidence. Some other people, they're going to try to say there's certain attributes that you can get in the Bible that can help you jump to timelessness. I don't buy those arguments, but there are people who are going to try to do that sort of thing. So again, it's a really wild sort of debate. But my view is that the biblical text doesn't give you that kind of view. You're not going to get simplicity. You're not going to get timelessness. You're not going to get impassibility, these kind of things.
Okay.
Maybe we could
Thank you very
define
much,
some
yeah.
of these terms. So, like, what's classical theism?
Mhm. Yeah, so classical theism, as I understand it, it's a particular conception of God that's going to say, God's perfect, of course. He's got all these omni attributes, like he knows all the things. He's omniscient. He's all powerful. He's all good. But that's boring because everybody's going to say, yeah, that's fine. So what classical theism is going to say, though, they're going to say there's 4 unique attributes, which is timelessness, immutability, simplicity, and impassibility. And so timelessness says that God exists without beginning and without end because God's eternal. But God also exists without succession and without temporal location. So God doesn't do one thing and then another and then another. Instead, God somehow exists in this sort of timeless presence, like all at once, without a before and after. To get immutability, the claim is that God does not change intrinsically or extrinsically, because if God changed extrinsically or in relation to things, that would already presuppose he was in time and undergoing succession. So God can't change in any way, shape, or form if he's going to be immutable in the sense you need for timelessness. Simplicity says God doesn't have any parts, but that's not terribly interesting. What's more interesting is usually what people who affirm simplicity say counts as a part, which is basically everything. So any idea of God having properties, that's got to go, because then that would be parts. The idea of God having distinct actions, that's got to go. So what they'll say is all those attributes, those things you want to attribute to God, like his power and his wisdom, they're all identical to each other and identical to God's existence. So there's just God. And God's omnipotence is his omniscience, and his omniscience is his goodness, and so forth. And then all of his actions, they're supposed to be identical to each other, such that there's one divine act, and then this one divine act is identical to God's existence as well. So God just is an act on simplicity. So it's a very strong claim.
Yeah.
Impassibility has 3 components. The first is that God can't suffer, and it's it's impossible for God to suffer. Well, why is that? Well, because of the other 2 components. So the second component is that God cannot be moved or influenced by anything outside of himself. And then the third component is that God can't have any emotion that is inconsistent with his perfect rationality, his perfect goodness, and his perfect happiness, because God is supposed to be in a state of pure, undisturbed bliss. So when you say that God can't suffer, part of the claim is, well, nothing I could do can influence God in any way, shape, or form. And then God's happiness, it's grounded entirely in himself. And in fact, he's identical to his happiness. So like, oh, well, of course I couldn't possibly, bring about some sort of suffering in God, because he's identical to happiness itself. So and then the classical view within Christianity affirms this idea of creation out of nothing, which is that the universe has an absolute beginning, prior to which there was no material stuff, none whatsoever. And there was just God hanging out by himself. So you've got some sort of state of affairs where God exists without the universe, which is what's denied from people who affirm pantheism. And then typically, I think what you see denied in a lot of different Hindu conceptions of God, because they typically want to think that God always exists with some sort of universe of some sort, unless there's sometimes there's some like temporal gaps between the universes where God and the souls are just kind of hanging out, waiting for God to reincarnate the next universe, where you don't have that in Christianity. You've just got God just kind of creating just like usually one universe, maybe a multiverse, but there is supposed to be, on this creation out of nothing view, some sort of state of affairs where God existed without anything else.
Yeah.
And so that's classical theism in a nutshell.
So that's why in Christianity there's an eschaton, whereas in Krishna consciousness we could call it a non-eschaton because we don't have that.
But if you allow me, because very, very, very interesting, right? But once again, I have just 2 remarks. But once again, you say that the concept of God has those 4 properties, 4 attributes. But again, can we claim that this is the Christian concept of God?
Oh, right.
Yeah. I think it's.
Yeah.
It's a
I want to say
claim,
no,
right?
you can't.
No,
A lot of people do. I think. Well, I just think it's false. But yeah, there are a lot of people who do want to say this is the Christian view of God. So sometimes when you pick up like a handbook on like Christian theology, and they'll lay out the Christian doctrine of God, that chapter will just lay out exactly what I described. It was just classical theism. They won't consider other views.
Sure.
Whereas you have other people who are going to be like open theists who say timelessness, get rid of it. Impassibility, simplicity, immutability, get rid of that. God's, time temporal and these sort of things.
Sorry for interrupting you, but it seems to me that as part as this endeavor to define God through these four properties, attributes, you should also be able to derive all other classical attributes from those four. Like Richard Swinburne, he tries to derive all divine attributes from just one, omnipotence. So it seems that you should, besides saying God has those four attributes, you should also prove that the other attributes follow from them. Am I wrong?
Oh, so as I'm seeing it, so pretty much all of the models of God that I see within Christianity and in Islam and Judaism, they're going to affirm basically everything that Swinburne says about like having all the power, having all the goodness and freedom and knowledge. And not everybody's happy with the way Swinburne's approach to like try to derive those, but they'll come up with some kind of way to derive them. But then I think there's a burden on anybody who wants to be a classical theist to go, well, now how are you going to get those other four attributes though? Because Swinburne's like, you can't get those. Those don't follow. And I want to say Swinburne's right. Whereas some of these other people are going to go, well, no, I'll have to give you some separate arguments for how to derive those attributes. So those are in-house debates, within Christianity about, can you get those other attributes? And I don't think you can, and I don't think they're coherent. So even if you could come up with some arguments for them, I'd still be like, the concept's incoherent. So I don't know what sort of evidence would matter at that point. So so I think you're right. There is the burden is on people. They have to try to figure out how to derive those extra four attributes.
Sure.
All right. So I guess the counter view to that would be theistic personalism. So we could either have a definition of that now, or Ricardo could explain where we fit on the spectrum. What would you like to do, Ricardo?
Okay, I can finish my.
Okay, let's do that.
My talk. It won't take long. And at some point I will have to, it would be easier if I could share my screen.
Yeah, if you try sharing it, I'll try to get it up on the stream.
Okay, so let me do it now. Can I do it later? Because these are my notes.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, good. Okay, so now my goal is to try to clarify again what we might call the Hare Krishna concept of God, or the Chaitanya Vaishnava concept of God. I spoke a little bit already about this tradition. I won't say anything about it again, but I will say that in my view there are two different ways we might try to define a concept of God. The first way, there might be other ways, but at least those two ways I think they are there. The first way is to present like a kind of general definition, like Anselm does. He presents God as the one greater than whom we can't think of. And it's interesting because in the Proslogion, he really tries to show that from this definition of God, many attributes follow. Or Descartes' view, as I said, of God as the one who possesses all excellence. But there is a second kind of way that we might try to define the concept of God, or a concept of God, which is just to list, to present a list of properties, of attributes. Okay, so my concept of God has omnipotence, omniscience, and so on and so forth. So I think we have at least those two ways to present or to define a concept of God. And when we look, for instance, at the Bhagavad Gita, and when we look more broadly at the Vedanta tradition, it's interesting because perhaps we find both. One of the main, perhaps the main concept of Vedanta, and the Bhagavad Gita is one of the three main texts of Vedanta. There's the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedanta Sutra, and the other is not one text but many texts. It's what we call the Upanishads, which is the last part of the Vedas. And in those texts and in this tradition, the Vedanta tradition, Brahma is like the key concept. The key concept, really, and one of the main endeavors, one of the main goals of any Vedanta philosophy is to say what Brahma is. I mean, and the different schools, they disagree on different points.
Maybe
but
we should distinguish that word from Lord Brahma, from Brahmins, and from
no Brahma, not the deity Brahma.
Yeah.
Brahma. Okay, which if we look at like some standard dictionary like the Monier-Williams, we are going to find something like that the Brahma is the ultimate and absolute reality, the ground and all-pervasive supreme principle of the universe, the absolute, the divine. The nature of Brahma is described in the Upanishads as Sat, existence, or absolute existence, Chit, or consciousness, absolute consciousness, and Ananda, absolute bliss. But what's interesting is that literally the word Brahma means, or it can be understood as meaning, that which is greater than the greatest. It comes from a root, which means, a Sanskrit root, which means to expand, to be greater than the greatest. So we might say that the literal meaning of the word Brahma is that one which is greater than the greatest. And it's interesting because it's kind of similar to Anselm's definition of God. But Anselm's definition is broader, of course, because he simply he does not simply says that God is greatest than the great, or greater than the greatest. Sorry, he says that God is greater, is something that we can even conceive a being who is greater than God. So it's really broader, Anselm's idea or Anselm's concept of God. But anyway, there's some similarity, and this concept, the concept of Brahma, it appears in the Bhagavad Gita, is a very important concept. So I'll speak a bit about the Bhagavad Gita in a few minutes. But another concept which perhaps provides a kind of general definition that we find in this text, the Bhagavad Gita, is the concept of Bhagavan. Bhagavad Gita means the song of Bhagavan. So Bhagavan, in general, when you take a look at the dictionaries, we find it defined as the Lord, God, venerable, the fortunate, the powerful, the blessed one, the glorious one, and so on and so forth. But again, when we look at the literal meaning of the word, the word Bhaga comes from a Sanskrit root, Bhag, which means power, splendor, or even excellence. The Monier-Williams dictionary, which is a very, very well-known Sanskrit dictionary, one of the definitions it gives to Bhaga is excellence. And Van is a suffix, which means the one who possesses. Like Gyanavan. Gyana means knowledge. Gyanavan, the one who possesses knowledge. So Bhagavan is the one who possesses Bhaga, who possesses excellence. And from a theological point of view, this term many times is interpreted as meaning the one who possesses all excellences, all opulences, infinitely. So it's almost the same definition as we find in Descartes' Meditations, where Descartes, he defines God as the one who possesses all excellence. So I think that's interesting, and it's the first definition that I would propose for the concept of God found in the Bhagavad Gita, that God is the one who possesses all excellences, all opulences. And of course, depending on the way you see, you understand this word, Bhaga. Indian traditions, usually they interpret in a specific way. Usually there are 6 excellences or opulences, and tradition they differ from which properties must be found in the list. But anyway, depending on the way you interpret this word, you might come up with a concept of God which might be pretty much alike to Western conceptions of God. But in the Bhagavad Gita, we can also find a different way to understand God, or to define the concept of God. And now I will try to share my screen. Let's see if I succeed. Can you see it there, Alex?
It's come through on Skype. Let me see how I can get it into OBS. It might come as an NDI.
I think it would be easier if I just read what's there.
Got it. Oh, it's not showing. Have you shared your screen? It's not showing. It's not even in Skype. It's not showing. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. So.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay, I'm gonna maximize it. Okay, now what I will do, I will just I took a look at the Bhagavad Gita, and specifically I took a look at a very good paper which tries to speak about the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita, which is Krishna. I didn't say that, but I have to say that now. So the Bhagavad Gita is a dialogue between two people, Arjuna on one side, and Krishna on the other side. And eventually Krishna, one of the speakers, he reveals himself as God, as being that Bhagavan, that superlative being. I just try to organize some verse according to specific divine attributes, divine properties, and I'm going to show them here. So the first thing that I think we should do is to point out that the concept of God found in the Bhagavad Gita is a monotheist concept of God. This is needed because we know in Hinduism there are many gods, many deities, and it's very easy for someone to think that they have their polytheism, not a monotheism. But despite being different gods, in the Bhagavad Gita, there is the claim that there is one God with capital G. There's only one God with capital G, and many other gods with small g. And these gods with small g, they are not really gods in the sense we understand it in monotheistic traditions. They are something like the angels in Christianity. They are beings that they have some power when compared to human beings, but they are not on the level of God. So Bhagavad Gita defends very strongly the thesis of monotheism. I have here just some verses, and I try to summarize. I took from that paper. I forgot to say the name of the paper. Is from a scholar called Howard Resnick. It was published long ago, perhaps 20 years ago, in a journal called Journal of Vaishnava Studies. Later on, perhaps I can give the reference, and Alex can share with you. And so I have here some parts of this paper, and in other parts I just wrote some stuff by myself. And now I'm gonna just read them. So about this issue, monotheism. Again, the Bhagavad Gita defends that there is only one God, So in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna, the speaker, declares himself to be the supreme Godhead, and he specifically asserts his supremacy over the well-known gods or demigods. Sometimes we use this word, demigods, to distinguish, to make the distinction from the monotheistic concept of God, of the Vedic or Hindu pantheon. Indeed, Krishna is the God of gods, and here I have the reference, the verse reference, chapter 10, verse 14. He is the source of all the other gods that inhabit the cosmos and the source of all that exists. So I think this property, this attribute is there. The God of the Bhagavad Gita, which is Krishna, who is Krishna, is the one God. He's also the supreme reality. He's Brahman. So within the Gita, Arjuna glorifies Krishna as the supreme Brahman, the supreme abode, the supreme purifier, the supreme divine person. He's the primeval person. There's nothing beyond him. So there is this claim all over and over again that there's nothing beyond Krishna. No one is equal to or greater than him. So, and that's the idea behind the concept of Brahma, that Brahma is there. Is greater than the greatest. There is nothing beyond Brahma. Brahma is the source of all reality. I come to that a little later. He's also the creator, the source, and the ontological support of everything. He's the great Lord of all the worlds. He's the creator and sustainer of everything. He's the source of everything, the principle from which everything emanates, and the origin and the annihilation of the entire cosmos. Krishna says there's nothing beyond him. I already said that. All this world rests on him like pearls and strung on a thread. All beings are situated in Krishna, but he's not in them. He's the source and maintainer of all beings. We can argue also that the concept of God of the Bhagavad Gita is omnipotent. There is no end to Krishna's vast divine powers. Each and every being that possesses power, beauty, or true excellence springs from a part of his splendor. And according to Arjuna, the other speaker, Krishna, sorry, there is a typo here. Krishna is the father of the moving and unmoving world. His power is unmatched, even in the three worlds. He's omniscient, or something close to that, although each soul is the knower of his field, his particular body. Krishna is the knower of all fields, meaning all bodies. Krishna knows the past, present, and future of all beings, but no one is in the material world knows him in truth. The omniscience of Krishna is superlatively causal, since Krishna is the source of everyone's memory, knowledge, and forgetting. He's wholly good, or at least good. Krishna says that he's the kind friend of all living beings, the mother, the father, and grandfather of this world. Arjuna confirms this, saying that Krishna is the father of the moving and unmoving. He's eternal. Krishna says, never did I not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor shall we not exist, all of us forever after. He's immanent. Krishna says that he is the Lord of all beings, stay in their hearts. He's a kind of cosmic soul present in every being's heart. Elsewhere, he states that he individually pervades the entire universe. He's a person, in some sense of the term. Krishna says that he is celebrated in this world and in the Vedas as the supreme person. The one who knows him in this way to be the supreme person is a knower of everything, and he worships him with all his heart. Similarly, Arjuna declares Krishna to be the eternal divine person, later saying, I consider you the eternal person. Krishna also states the Sanskrit word for person is Purusha. Krishna also states that because he inheres in a human-like body, foolish people disrespect him, for they do not understand his transcendental nature. This is important because it points out the fact that Krishna is not a person as we are persons, like we have material bodies. Krishna, as he doesn't have this kind of body. Although he is unborn, himself never deteriorates, and although he's the Lord of all beings, he appears in this earth by his own potency. And some claims about the relation between God and the living beings. So in the 13th chapter, Krishna describes both the individual soul, because this is important, because if we agree that Krishna, God, is a person, we have to say the sense in which he's different from us. I already mentioned one sense, but there are others. In the 13th chapter, Krishna describes both the individual soul and the Lord as Purusha persons, but the contrast is striking. The individual soul is a Purusha, but he is situated in material nature. Second, trying to enjoy the material qualities, and third, compelled by his attachment to those qualities to take birth in high and low species of bodily engagement. Because, of course, Bhagavad Gita, as you perhaps know, maintains or supports a kind of theory of reincarnation. In the next verse, the Lord describes himself also as Purusha, but the difference between the two Purushas could not be more clear, for Krishna is said to be the supreme or transcendental Purusha, Purusha Para. The use of the adjective Para to denote the supreme Purusha is significant, for this word not only entails the notion of supremacy, but also a strong sense of the other. In the same verse, Lord Krishna also uses the word Paramatma. Atma means the self or soul, describing himself thus as the supreme soul. And earlier, Krishna states that the living being in this world is eternally a fragmental part of himself. So we are kind of parts, or the Sanskrit word is amsha. We are parts of God. The soul is further said to be indivisible, and so the fragmental status is not effectuated in time, but in a pre-eternal, never-ending fact. So here is just a list. Okay, it's not what I called a reconstruction of the concept of God. Of course, one might ask me to show that all these attributes, all these properties, they are consistent to each other. This is something that has to be done. I didn't do it, but it has to be done. And another thing that has to be done before that is to clarify the meaning of these attributes. What we mean by the word eternal. There are, in philosophy of religion, it's a big discussion. Ryan, of course, knows that. What the sense in which God is eternal. He's outside time, he's inside time, and so on and so forth. So there is a lot of philosophical work to be done here. And as I said, as far as I know, no one did that, and I didn't do it. But I know in order to present like a philosophical concept of God, we have to do that. We have first to be clear about what we mean by the claim that the concept of God in the Bhagavad Gita has the property of omnipotence, omniscience, eternity, personhood, and so on and so forth. And the second thing we have to do, which corresponds to the first task I mentioned earlier, that we have to show that all these properties, all these attributes, they are consistent to each other. So what I'm really presenting here is what I perhaps might call a pre-philosophical view of the concept of God found in the Bhagavad Gita. However, I'd like to point out, because earlier I said that we should have a kind of third criterion for the issue about the rationality of theistic belief, which I call the plausibility of the concept of God. Our concept of God should be as close as possible to the idea of God as a maximally perfect being. And there are some verses in the Bhagavad Gita which are very, very interesting, that they point to the fact that the God of the Gita, or the concept of God of the Bhagavad Gita, is kind of maximally it has a kind of maximal reciprocity, and it respects our free will in a very strong way. I won't say maximal way, but in a very strong way. And the first verse I would like to mention is a verse very interesting. It appears in the context of other deities, because the Bhagavad Gita it is a dialogue which takes place inside a specific cultural context. And in this context, as I said, there are different deities, and people, they worship different deities. but in this verse, we find the claim that Krishna, God, he not only tolerates that we worship other deities, but he is the one who gives the faith that we need to engage in this worship. So the verse is like that: whoever wishes to worship whatever form, faithfully devoted, to each I bestow unmoving faith. Of course, one may argue that why God would allow us to worship like false gods. Well, we can reply something like that faith. First, we have to understand that our existence doesn't end with the end of our lives. We have multiple lives, so we don't have only one life to get to God, to get to perfection. We have many lives, and the idea of surrendering unto something is a very big step. So because it's a big step, and because it's a step that will be needed for us to approach God, it's useful, I would say, to have that inclination. And that's why Krishna allows us he allows us to worship other deities. But this is just one side of the issue. The other side is because he respects our free will. He doesn't want to force us to worship him. So I find amazing, because in my naive view, I think it's a kind of the idea of a maximally tolerant concept of God. And so perhaps it points to the idea that the concept of God found in the Bhagavad Gita, it's plausible after all. And in fact, he fully respects our free will. So there is one of the last verses of the Bhagavad Gita, after Krishna gave a lot of information to Arjuna about his nature as the supreme God and the ontological need to worship him. There are a lot of verses that point to that Krishna not only says, I am the one God, there is one God, like you are part of me. In order to be complete, in order to be happy, you need to connect to me. That's one of the meanings of the word yoga in the Bhagavad Gita. But after talking about all that, he says something like that: thus I have taught you knowledge more secret than the secret knowledge about his own nature. Reflecting on this fully, do as you wish. It might seem trivial, but there are many people that try to force their religious views, not in an academic context.
You're trying to say God's not a religious fanatic?
Yeah, that's it. He's not a religious fanatic. That's it. He respects our free will. He respects our free will. And also, he reciprocates to every living being. That's a very interesting verse found in chapter 4. However anyone approaches me, I accept them in just that way. So he respects our free will. He doesn't try to force a specific view, a specific lifestyle on us, because people might see God in nature. He respects that. He accepts that, because that's a way to approach God. It's not the ideal way, it's not the ultimate way, but it's a way, and perhaps it's what we can do. And he respects that, and he accepts that. But again, we are talking about a theology where we have like several lives to succeed. So it's not a big problem. It's not a big deal if you don't do it in this lifetime. So again, it might be kind of frustrating from a philosophical point of view, because on one side, when we take a look at the general definition, we have something quite interesting. The word Brahman, the word Bhagavad. I mean, it has some interesting similarities with some Western conceptions. But if I just list the properties, the attributes of God found in the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, I will still have a lot of work to do to show that this is a philosophical concept, say. And again, I couldn't find a work. As far as I know, no one has done that. But that's it. And a last thing I would say is that, because the general topic is the Hare Krishna concept of God, or the Chaitanya Vaishnava concept of God. And as I said, this is just one text. If you look at other texts, there's much more, because these are like the descriptions of God as they are pretty much close to Western concepts of God. God is a kind of king, as a superlative being, but in other texts, especially in the Bhagavatam Purana, there's something which it gives us a view quite different. It gives us a view of God as a person, God as having relationships with other persons. And so it's like, I would say it's like God as a maximal person. The concept of the idea of personhood is really maximal in those texts. So because in philosophy, usually we talk like many times about external attributes of God. Most of the time, attributes that put God in relation to ourselves, the Creator. He's wholly good. He can do anything related to us, but it's like God doesn't have a life. But in other texts that I am not dealing with them here. I'm just giving this information. In other texts, we see a much richer concept of God. God is really as a person, meaning in terms of relationships, is a being, a God who is able to engage in personal, in very, very rich relationships with other beings. And the idea of yoga, and the idea of the kind of yoga which we emphasize in our tradition, which is called Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti means devotion, is that we have like an eternal relationship with God, and the purpose of yoga is to revive this relationship. So it's really like God as a maximal person, and the idea of personhood is really from a theological point of view quite well developed. Sorry. So that's it.
All right. So, Dr. Ryan Mullins, would you like to give some comments?
I guess at the moment, all I see is like a really standard list of divine attributes that like most models of God are going to say that looks good. So I'm not seeing anything terribly unique yet here. But I know there are some other interesting claims within the Bhagavad Gita that I would like to hear more about. But if you haven't worked on them, that's fine. So there's some of these passages where it says like where God says like, I am death, I am time, I am all these sort of things. And so like those are really cool. They sound really interesting.
Sure.
But again, like I know that I know that not anybody's really trying to develop them, at least within the Hare Krishna tradition. But I was curious, like, I guess I'm curious, has anybody tried to develop those in the Hare Krishna tradition that you know of?
Yeah, not from a philosophical perspective. From a theological perspective, yes. And we have a lot of claims like that and different traditions interpret them in different ways. Like in some people claim that those verses they support the idea that there is a kind of pantheism there, but they can be interpreted also differently. And these verses, they appear I think in chapters 7, 9, and 11, if I'm not wrong. And in most of them, the word associated with them is the word bhumi, which means excellence or opulence or power. So one way to interpret those claims, when Krishna says that I'm death, I'm the flavor of water, I'm the sun of the light of the sun, the light of the moon, and so on and so forth, that he's just showing his powers. By identifying himself with them, he's just showing his bhumis, his powers, his opulence, that he's the source of everything. But from that, we are not allowed to conclude that he is those things, that he is death, like I am, like Brazilian, or and you know what I mean. So it's not his identity. It's like a way to show how great he is. And you should see that many times he compares himself, or he identifies himself with like topmost items of some list. Like there are fishes, but there's the shark. Like the shark is the mighty fish. So he says, I am the shark. So there are stars in a very broad sense, but he's the sun. It's the star we see. Is the brightest, and so on and so forth. So it's a way to show that he's really is the greater, but not that he's identical with those things.
I wonder if those verses are analogies, like, we can understand God's splendor by things that we can understand in this world. So the biggest mountain we know is the Himalayas. So God says, I'm of mountains, I'm the Himalayas. The fiercest animal in the sea is the shark. So of sea creatures, I'm the shark.
Yes.
And so on.
Yeah. Also, yeah. And also it's very important because in one of those chapters, Krishna responds to a question of Arjuna, and Arjuna asks, "How should I meditate on you?" So he gives like an approach, a way that we look at the sun and remember of God, of Krishna. So it's a way to meditate on God by looking at nature.
So
that's very important.
What I'm
also
wondering about is how the Hare Krishna conception maps onto the Western conceptions. Like, are we classical theists? Are we pantheists? Are we panentheists? Are we theistic personalists? Do we think God's simple?
Yeah. First, we definitely are personal theists. We are not pantheists. Like our concept of God is a monotheist concept of God. So there's no doubt about that. That's the first point, and that's the easy part. And we're not pantheists, but if our concept of God is simple, I would say it's not. It depends on your definition of simplicity. So you have to give me your definition of simplicity in order for me to try to answer this question. But I mean, simple in the sense that it cannot be divided. In the traditional sense, I would say no, because God has properties. In one of the verses, Krishna says that he has parts, amshas, and we are parts. He has, and even nature is his prakriti. Prakriti is interpreted many times as nature, but some philosophers like Ramanuja interprets the word prakriti as attribute. So Ramanuja is another, like the founder of another Vedanta and Vaishnava school. We are related to this school, but there are some difference. But Ramanuja, he says that we are attributes of God. Nature is an attribute of God. But anyway, the word is there in the Bhagavad Gita. The word prakriti, which can be interpreted as attribute. So in like the philosophical sense, I would say the concept of God is not simple. But just to finish, but at the same time, in the second chapter, Krishna speaks about the soul, right? Or the Atma, the word there, the word used as Atma is the one who is embodied. The Hino, the one who has a body, is the word Krishna used in the second chapter, and he gives a lot of he describes the soul. Later on, he calls Atma, and one of the features is that it cannot be divided. So in this sense, we can say it is simple. But again, it's a specific sense of the word simple.
So divine simplicity is given in a dialectical context to answer certain philosophical objections that were raised against other conceptions of God, which would help us understand what's meant by divine simplicity. Could you comment on that, Ryan?
Sure. So simplicity in the Western traditions usually means no properties at all. So anything I would attribute to God would have to be identical, like strictly identical to God. So I said this a bit earlier, and so then all of God's acts would be identical to each other as well, and those would be identical to his existence. So that doesn't sound like what's going on here with Krishna. I mean, this because it sounds like Krishna actually has properties, and seems like he may have a bunch of different distinct acts because he acts in different ways at different times, acts in certain ways with his lovers and certain ways with his devotees and whatnot. So it doesn't sound like anything like, say, like Anselm's understanding of simplicity, which I think that's a good thing for the Krishna view, because I think something like Anselm's view of simplicity is incoherent. So it looks like the Krishna view would be a step ahead at that point.
0.1 for Krishna, minus point for Anselm.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
Okay, so what's divine simplicity given to answer? What's the objection?
To objection to what?
Divine simplicity is the answer to an objection to other conceptions of God, that there's some logical contradiction. Therefore, divine simplicity solves it.
Yeah. So one kind of view is they'll say that anything that has parts can come apart. And so if God had properties, so if God actually had like essential attributes, then those essential attributes could somehow, come apart from God. I don't understand why I should think that God's essential attributes could somehow come apart. And even within the Western tradition, like someone like Al-Ghazali and the Islamic tradition goes, why should I think a thing like that? So, I just because you said so, like, I don't know. So yeah, it's relying on some philosophical assumptions that I think are dubious, and I think you can reject. So again, yeah, I think the Krishna view could easily do the same thing as Al-Ghazali does and go, why should I think that God's essential properties, like God essentially is omnipotent? Why should I think that God's omnipotence could just somehow like come apart from God? Like why would I think a thing like that?
Is divine simplicity also given to answer the Euthyphro dilemma?
It can be. It often is. A lot of times, though, when I see people affirm it, I don't think they quite understand what they're saying, though. So the Euthyphro dilemma is, let's see if I can set this up quite right. So the claim is supposed to be like, does God will something? Or declare that something's good just because it's good? Or does he declare that something's good because like it just whatever is good is just whatever he declares it? And so if it's the first one, where like God declares something good because it is good, then it sounds like there's this thing that is goodness that's floating free from God. And so God's like somehow like subject to it. So there's like a 10 commandments floating in the sky, and it's separate from God, and God's like, I have to do whatever that 10 commandments says. And so that seems bad. And then the other side is, if God, whatever is good just because God declares it, then it might seem like it's completely arbitrary, whatever God declares. Why did God say that? Well, he just did. Could he like tell you to go around kicking puppies? Would that be make it good? Well, God declared it, so therefore it's good. Well, that sounds bad. So no one likes either of these sort of views. And so simplicity is supposed to say, well, look, God just is identical to goodness itself. So it's not like there's this thing separate from God floating around that's telling him what to do, and it's not like God's just arbitrarily declaring what's right or wrong, because he is goodness itself. But you don't really need divine simplicity for that, though. You just need the claim that God is essentially good and is the source of all the other good stuff. So you don't really need simplicity to kind of answer that sort of objection. But there are a lot of people who think that, it would help with the Euthyphro dilemma. So I think the Krishna view could again just go, why couldn't I just say God just is essentially good? Why do I need to go all the way to simplicity to get out of the Euthyphro dilemma?
So does William Lane Craig use divine simplicity?
No, so he's rejected this in so there's the philosophical foundations for the Christian worldview. So he rejects simplicity there, but he does affirm some kind of divine command theory. But it's a certain kind of view. So it is like God's essentially good; he's the source of goodness. But it's not like God's goodness is identical to his omniscience and identical to his existence. And so none of these identity claims that you see with simplicity. So I'll just say God's the source of goodness. God is goodness. But and you're not, and so it's the standard of goodness, but you don't need to go all the way to simplicity for that. That's the way Craig goes.
Right. I like using analogies to parents, like, is a mother bound by her duties to her child, or is it just an expression of who she is, that she raises her children well? Something like that for God, right? Is he bound by these laws of goodness, or is it just an expression of who he is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the laws are these like God's mom telling him what to do, and you want to be like, well, no, it's not. So it seems like someone like William Lane Craig, they're going to go, no, these are just properties that God has, and then what Ricardo's like laying out here, it looks like, that's the Christian view. They could just say the exact same thing. So God's the source of all this stuff, but yeah.
So maybe we can list some of the main objections to conceptions of God and debates that go on, and then we can look at how the Hare Krishna conception ranks. Give just a rough. It doesn't have to be exhaustive, but just the main things that are debated around conceptions of God.
Yeah. So when I'm looking at this here, it's a very kind of generic sort of view. So I'm trying to figure out where to place it exactly. It looks like it could be within like a panentheistic view, because it's gonna deny creation out of nothing. So it can't be like some of these kind of other theistic views, and that's fine. So, and you can, because there's various arguments you can give against creation out of nothing. So it seems like it would fit there nicely, and then it would also fit kind of nicely, I think, with amongst panentheists. It's hard to figure out what they actually agree on, other than the denial of creation out of nothing, because some of them want to say God's timeless and impassible. Others want to go, no. He really is like affected by what happens in the world, and then some of them want to go, he doesn't know the future. So they want to kind of look like they're closer. They're like they're gonna be friends with the open theists. So it looks to me like the Hare Krishna is going to fit within the panentheist like camp. Where they're going to sit, I'm guessing they're going to be rejecting impassibility, because it looks like Krishna is actually affected by things that happen in the world, and he cares and he's moved. If that's is that fair to say that he's actually going to be affected by the world in some extent?
Ricardo?
Yes.
Yeah, so I would say that personally, I think there'd be a benefit then for the view.
Yeah. I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm inclined to say yes, but I mean, it depends on the way you interpret the word, to be the expression to be affected, right? Mm-hmm. Because in the Bhagavad Gita we find what you might call the theory of the avatars, right? That Krishna, God, he descends in order to take care of some issues. In the Bhagavad Gita, he says that when there is a rise of adharma, like injustice, there's a mess, he comes down. And that's why we have so many avatars in Hinduism. Like we have Krishna, we have Ram, we have Nishinha, and so on and so forth. So this indicates that he does care. He interferes. He does miracles, for instance. But of course, we can argue that this doesn't affect his nature.
Would it affect his maybe his emotional experiences?
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
Because
that's good.
And also because I mentioned earlier those 6 opulences, and one of those opulences that Krishna is supposed to have is renunciation. So he's renounced. I mean he acts, but with detachment.
Right.
Yeah. So this is
so it
something
looks.
We can use to.
Yeah. So this looks like, for me then, so like I said, this looks like a view of a version of panentheism. And then, so anybody who wants to reject attributes like impassibility, they're going to want to go, well, this Krishna concept, that looks pretty good. So these are all, as far as I can tell, they're going to be points in favor of Krishna views if someone affirms this idea that God cares about the universe, that God's really related to the universe, and that he really does give creatures free will and have some kind of back and forth with them, and is emotionally impacted by them. Anybody who's in favor of that, I think they should be going this Hare Krishna view. Sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, he's not emotionally affected.
So what are the?
I think that sounds right.
What are the objections to that view then?
Mm-hmm. I don't like this one, but I'll go ahead and give it so you guys can consider it and do what you want with it. So one common objection is if God actually suffers, then he can't actually save us. And so I'm trying to think how to spin this in a more Hindu kind of context. Okay, so to be saved is to get out of the wheel of suffering, right? To stop being reincarnated.
Yeah, liberation.
Yeah, so liberation. There we go. Thank you. So I could run an objection like this. Be like, look, guys, if God suffers, if he's affected by us, by these things in the world, then he's not really fully renounced, has he? He's kind of caught up in this passionate existence, so he's going to be reincarnated too. Well, then he doesn't have the power to actually help us get liberated from all the reincarnation. So wouldn't it be better? It would be better to have a God who is completely and utterly renounced, who's completely impassible, cannot be affected by anything, because then he's really not, he's really renounced. That's the kind of God who could actually get you out of reincarnation, get you out of this whole samsara nonsense.
Yeah.
So we did.
You want me to talk?
Argue back that.
Yeah. I completely agree. I completely agree with your objection. But again, as it seems that we have agreed on that. The fact that God, that Krishna, he acts or he reacts, he cares for us, doesn't imply necessarily that he's emotionally affected by that. In fact, that's a very important point, because one of the things that Krishna asks from us is that we also have that kind of detachment. It's one of the first lessons that we learn in the Bhagavad Gita, and one of the first style or kind of yoga that the Bhagavad Gita presents, that is called karma yoga. That one of its key aspects is exactly to act with detachment, and this detachment is a consequence of an understanding of reality, that we are not part of this world. Like, we are souls, and he gives a bunch of very big lists of the features of the soul. He can't be burned. He doesn't die. The soul, and so on and so forth. So he it's at some point it's like a dualist view. Like there's the world, and there is like a spiritual realm, and we are part of this spiritual realm. So all suffering in one sense is illusion, and we have that famous word, like the concept of Maya, which many times is translated as illusion. So in one sense, it's like I of course I don't want to trivialize anyone's suffering. I suffer, of course, but anyway, this suffering it's a consequence of a mistaken way to see reality. When we get full knowledge of reality, we will not suffer. And of course, God has this full knowledge, so he doesn't suffer. But he helps us, because again, he's a kind of loving father. He wants to free us from suffering. But this doesn't imply that he suffers because we are suffering. and he gets like he's in anxiety also, or anything like that. And again, we have textual evidence that he doesn't feel those stuff.
I think we could understand it by drawing analogies to, very advanced personalities that we can observe. So do we consider somebody who feels great compassion for the suffering of living entities greater, or do we consider a person who is absorbed in meditation and is not even aware of other people's suffering and doesn't want to be aware? Which person do we consider to be greater? And also, for the person who's absorbed in compassion for the living entities, there's actually a kind of bliss there. It's not the kind of suffering that like, oh, I don't like seeing that person suffer because it makes me suffer. It's a kind of compassion that actually springs from love. And especially, like people that are engaged in doing things like that, doing something about it, like, giving in charity or doing some service for people in need, there's a kind of bliss that comes from that. So God exhibits these qualities to the highest degree. So you mentioned that, Ryan, you said you didn't really stand behind that objection. You were just listing it. So perhaps we'll move on to any others.
I'm trying to think of another kind of objection that the view possibly might face. So, so some of them might be objections to, like, based on like the denial of creation out of nothing. So I guess I'll run one of these by and just see what you think. So someone might go, well, look at like standard Big Bang cosmology. It seems like the universe had some kind of absolute beginning. Is there really an absolute beginning on the Krishna concept of creation? And if not, then it seems like it might not fit with, maybe some of our best, or at least the best science that we have at the moment.
That's a good point. Yeah, in fact, the Bhagavad Gita supports the idea that not only like eternity concerned to us, to him, and to nature, it goes in both directions, past and future. So there is not a beginning, neither for ourselves nor for the world. However, not in the Bhagavad Gita. Let me think. No, perhaps the Bhagavad Gita. I'm not completely sure, but in other texts, like many Puranas, there is the idea that the universe, it is eternal, but there are like creations and destructions from time to time. So it's like the stuff from which the universe is made is eternal, okay? But the universe with like trees and dogs and stars and so on and so forth, it is created. It has a beginning. But matter, the stuff from which all those things is created, is eternal. So there's a kind of cycle of temporary or creations and destructions and so on and so forth. So in this way, perhaps we can this view can be compatible with our scientific view. Well, perhaps the Big Bang was just the more recent creation.
Right, exactly. So you could easily say, well, each one of these universes had a beginning. They're all successive. Like that one died. Well, all right. Well, God reincarnated. So that was the Big Bang. Was this one? So yeah, it seems like that's the easiest way to get out of the objection.
Well, there are some scientists who argue for cyclical Big Bangs. I don't know if they call it the Big Crunch theory or something like that. That there's a crunch and then another bang and then a crunch.
Yeah.
But also we got to look at the evidence they're using, which is basically they can see that the stars are moving further and further apart. They reverse that and they assume there's a point where they're all in one spot. Beyond that, they've got no data to infer anything. So the idea that it didn't happen repeatedly is not something that could be scientifically defended.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, that's another way you can follow, right? To doubt the scientific, so-called scientific claim.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's kind of dangerous path, because at the end we can doubt everything.
Yeah.
Right.
We can just be anti-realist about all this stuff. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think as far as possible, we should try to make our view compatible with the scientific view as far as possible.
Right. Sure. So another possible objection in the neighborhood here, again, attacking the claim that it's denying creation of nothing. So a standard view of causation is that causes are always before their effects. Now, if that's the case, and you've got some kind of, it seems like it's a somewhat temporal understanding of God, like God does one thing and then another and then another. So if God is the cause of each successive universe, it would have to be the case that there would be God before the universe, because causes are before their effects. And so that seems like you would have God before anything else, because the cause being God would have to be before all the other stuff that he creates. So there would have to be a state of affairs where God exists without anything else, in which case you wouldn't have the sort of eternal creation, or creation being co-eternal with God.
That's a good point also. Yes, the problem is that according to standard Puranic view or worldview, we don't have a beginning in the past. So the chain of causality, it goes without end in the past. And that's perhaps, I don't know, perhaps Alex Arjuna might help me here. Well, I don't know how we can make those two things compatible, but perhaps we might defend the reasonability of the idea. I mean, why there must have like a beginning? Is that really necessary? It's so, I never thought of those things before. I'm doing it right now, but do we really need to have like a beginning in terms of material creation? It doesn't mean, I mean, first of all, it seems to me that is not an inconsistent claim to claim that the creation, the material reality is eternal in this sense. You just go on in the past forever. I mean, we can't grasp. That's true. We can't grasp, and there are a lot of philosophical puzzles that arise from this lack of intuition, that we can't grasp the idea that there's no beginning. That I mean, most of many cosmological arguments, they start from this intuition that there must, there is, it must to have, we should have a beginning. But I would risk to say that first is not incoherent to say that there is no beginning. And I think, if I'm not wrong, perhaps this is an objection that many people raise against cosmological arguments, or some versions of cosmological arguments, but perhaps I'm wrong. And so perhaps I would follow that path, that we might have a reasonable view in which there is no beginning, and if you don't have to have a beginning, so it seems we don't have problem anymore. Would you agree?
I think I missed how you get it. So if you've got this causal principle that causes are always before their effects,
okay,
then you're going to have God being before all the other stuff that he affects. So that's where you're going to get, it seems like you're going to have God without anything else at some point.
Well, before,
because the cause, God would be before the effect.
For any,
okay, so I got it.
For any effect in question, you have God before that. So you have an infinite regress, but you know, you can have inconceivable things such as infinities in God. But for any one particular thing, you have God before that. And then you go back further and you find another thing, and then you find God before that one, and that goes back infinitely. I would offer.
I mean, that's a way to run the argument is to get an infinite regress, but I wasn't even thinking of that yet.
Yeah, no. I think this doesn't work, Arjuna, because I mean, we can claim that God is outside time, because he's not in the realm of causality, but we know that we are. Yes, I would need some time to think of that. That's a good point.
I would offer an opposite objection. So the conception of God, which your objection would argue for, would be one where at some point back in history you have God existing alone, and he's like, I'm bored, or, I'm lonely or whatever, let's create.
Yeah.
So that would be the counter view of God. And I would raise an objection to that view of God, which is that I can imagine a greater God, namely one who's never alone. Because if God is full of all six opulences, then if there's a point in history where he's all alone and bored and lonely, that's not so great. Whereas a God who's never bored, never alone, always surrounded by all opulences is greater. And then, of course, we get into ontological relationships as opposed, and they don't necessarily need to have a temporal binding to them. Like you can have a bowling ball sitting on a trampoline for eternity. The bowling ball is causing the trampoline to sag, even though in the thought experiment there was never a time when the trampoline was not sagging. It's still, or like a lamp throwing light onto an object. Even if it's been doing that since eternity, still the lamp is the source of the light. So in a similar way, God is the sustaining cause. That's the ontological relationship to all other causes and to creation and to the ontological existence of all other things, even though there's no temporal aspect to this relationship.
So there's two separate points you brought up. One is this point about causation, and the other one is about like a bored sort of God. So let's talk about the second one for a second. So what you're talking about is a simultaneous causation with the ball and the trampoline case. Which that's fine. Like that's one way to get out of the objection I was raising, was you reject the claim that all causes are always before their effects, because you just go, maybe there's some simultaneous causes. Like that's possible. And so then that's like, and then of course you have to defend that claim, but that's the way to, I think, to get out of the previous objection I had raised, is to go, I'll reject that causal principle and instead I'll affirm there can be simultaneous causes. With the second one though, God being bored, I guess I don't know why one would think God would be bored, especially if God really is like a master at renunciation. Seems like he wouldn't be able to get happiness from all this other stuff around him if he's really renounced everything. So I guess I'm kind of missing the dialectical force here.
Well, he's renounced, but he's also able to relish. So, like I've heard somebody say that in an astrological chart, it's hard to tell the difference between someone who is very renounced, who could live just as a saint with nothing, and somebody who could be a multi-billionaire, because the ability to have wealth and actually live with it in a productive way, and to have nothing is a lot of the same psychology. So the renunciation is similar, is related to the ability to be able to enjoy great opulence. But you're basically just, so we have six opulences, and you're basically just taking one of them, renunciation, and saying that should be enough. Why do we need all the others? But there's a reason why there's six and not just that one, because you add six of them together and then you get Bhagavan, full of all good qualities to the highest degree.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So it would be so God wouldn't be able to have all of these opulences without a universe. Is that the claim?
Well, I mean, we distinguish between the material universe and the spiritual universe. So, the material universe is created and destroyed, but Krishna is always existing in the spiritual universe, which has no it doesn't have any kind of destruction or creation. It's just always existing. So God's there, as a child living in Vrindavan, playing a flute and wrestling with the cowherd boys and so on for eternity. There's no time before when he's like, oh, let me create this cowherd village and, go into go into a particular type of illusion where I forget that I'm God and I'm able to enjoy these personal loving relationships. That he's always exhibiting that quality. So yeah, I mean, I think having a point at time where this began kind of weakens the greatness of the theology.
Okay.
Yes, can I talk now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You go.
No, just if you're done.
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah.
Okay, I might have an answer for Ryan's objection. So the objection was that Krishna is the cause of all causes, and we find that in some Upanishads. But in order to be the cause of anything, you should come before that thing. So in this way, God, he must come before the creation of the world. So this way, you wouldn't be able to claim that the world always existed as we do. Okay, it seems to me that this is the claim. So I think we can reply to that, making two remarks, pointing out two things. The first one is that I think that we need to do that. Is like it's reasonable to have an infinite chain of causality. So for instance, we have theoretical structures like real numbers and so many others, where we have an infinity in both directions. Okay, so from a theoretical point of view, from a conceptual point of view, not only we might have that, but we have this sort of structure, which is infinite. So it's coherent. I would claim to defend the existence of an infinite chain of causes and effects. That's the first point. But this doesn't work if you still claim that God is the cause of everything in this temporal sense of causation. So my suggestion is to withdraw that God is not the cause of all causes in this sense. So in what sense we can say that God is the cause of everything or is the source of everything? So I would go with Ramanuja. Okay, and this is a big issue, because I mentioned earlier that even in the Bhagavad Gita we find the claim that the material world is a prakriti of God, of Krishna, and prakriti can be translated as nature. It can be translated as a kind of energy or an aspect, and also as an attribute. And Ramanuja, he interprets this word as an attribute, and it's very famous. Ramanuja is the founder of what we call Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta. And he claims that he makes this analogy. He says that we are the body of God, that ourselves, the souls, and the material reality is like the body of God. It's just an analogy to make the point that we are attributes or properties. Of course, now we have to understand in a different way the concept of property or attribute. But if we accept that the material reality is like an attribute of God, so that's the way we understand the claim that God is the ontological support of everything. And that's how we understand the claim that he's the source of everything. And that's how we understand the claim that he's the cause of everything. Because the whole material reality, and even ourselves, we are part of God in this sense. We are an attribute. We are or a property of God. So in this, of course, again, we have to clarify the way we are understanding the word attribute here, and I don't have a ready answer, but I think it's a promising path to follow. Does this make sense?
I need to think about it a bit more. But it's approaching midnight here in Finland, so
Right. Yeah, we're gonna have to wrap it up.
So
soon.
yeah, I think we need to wrap it up. But yeah, but I think I kind of understand what you're starting to gesture towards. Yeah.
Have you got any more objections to offer, Ryan?
No, because again, it seems to me that I guess this is my main takeaway from this is this particular conception of God that Ricardo's laid out here that you can find from the Bhagavad Gita. It seems like it's going to have a nice fit with what a lot of different people in the Christian tradition are going to say different parts of it they're going to quibble with here and there, but overall, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a really big radical difference.
But Michael Shermer
except
told me,
with regards to maybe like creation ex nihilo.
Michael Shermer told me that all the religions disagree categorically with one another and make mutually exclusive claims. And you're trying to tell me that we have similar ideas about God.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely gonna be some differences elsewhere, but with regards to this one, like, I mean, so Christians are gonna say, well, God's not just one person; He's three persons, but immanent, eternal, holy, good, omniscient, omnipotent, all that stuff. Yeah, that seems pretty cool. It seems good. So, yeah, there's some differences here. I'm not denying those, but there's a lot of common ground.
I think Michael Shermer just displays his ignorance of world religions.
I mean, I didn't want to say that out loud, but we're all thinking it. So,
I think it needs saying. Okay. So, would you say we're theistic personalists or classical theists? Are those the two main competing ones?
I think theistic personalism is a horrible category that no one should ever use, because it's too coarse grained. I don't really know what it means. But so the 5 models of God that I typically look at are classical theism, neoclassical theism, open theism, panentheism, and pantheism. And so it looks like the Hare Krishna view. It looks like a panentheism to me, as far as I can tell. But I've also published papers going, panentheism is super vague and it's not clear what they're saying. So maybe the Hare Krishna view doesn't want to necessarily go with a panentheistic model, because if it's that vague, then that's not going to help it out.
Well, it just means it's a category that requires further specification.
A lot. Exactly.
So you have many subcategories.
Maybe, or well, the main problem with panentheism, at least in a lot of Christian circles, is they only give metaphors; they don't give metaphysics, and so it's hard to. In a lot of metaphors they use are borrowed from, like classical theists who give also a clear metaphysical story. So it's like, give me a non-metaphorical claim, and the best I can get is something like a denial of creation out of nothing. Some kind of immanence, but everybody's got immanence. So I've at least got the denial of creation out of nothing.
Right. So we've defined classical theism, but I don't think we've really necessarily mentioned what the other views are. Could you give quick definitions of the other views?
Oh, sure. So all of them want to say God's got all these omni properties and all the good stuff on this list. But so neoclassical theism, they're going to deny one or more of the 4 classical attributes of timelessness, immutability, simplicity, and impassibility. Which one of those 4? It depends who you ask. I think they need to deny all 4. But they're going to agree with a classical theist that God's knowledge extends to the future. Whereas an open theist is going to say, deny all 4 of those classical attributes. Get rid of timelessness, get rid of immutability, get rid of impassibility, get rid of simplicity. Also, God cannot know the future. It's impossible to know the future. Or maybe there's just nothing there to know. So they're going to deny that. And then when you get into the panentheists, they're going to say, all of you guys are wrong about creation out of nothing. Some eternal creation or an emanation or something like that. And then from there, panentheists, some of them go, God knows the future, God's impassible. Some others go, no, get rid of that. God doesn't know the future either. So it's why it's kind of a bit of a mixed bag.
And then pantheism? Sorry.
And then pantheism, God and the universe are identical.
So I think we have an element of that there, although what is it that said that, I can't remember if it's, I'll probably get it wrong. It's either God is the universe, but the universe isn't God. Yeah, I think that's the one.
So that's the panentheist. So that's the statement they'll make when trying to pin them down. What that looks like, what that means is that's the challenge. So the pantheist will say there's an identity claim here, whereas the panentheist is supposed to be denying the identity claim. The world is in God, but God is more than the world.
Like we'd say God is identical with everything in existence, but not in the same sense that would say God is identical with his name or God is identical with his form. So that there's some kind of difference.
Right. Yeah, so you're not talking about like strict numerical identity, right?
Yeah.
Because if we're parts of God,
identity,
which is some of the claims, then that I wouldn't be identical to the whole of God, because I would just be a part or something, right?
An analogy that's given is like Prabhupada would give this. I'm talking into a dictaphone. And this is I'm identical with the recording of my voice, but at the same time, I'm not the recording of my voice. So it's a potency.
Okay.
So, you
Okay,
listen
so
to someone's voice on the radio, say, oh, that's so-and-so. But
yeah.
it's not in the same sense that it's like, oh, well, let's give him, let me give him a bite of my burrito or something. It's like,
right. Yeah. So you're not talking about numerical identity here. Yeah. I see what you're saying. So, yeah. So that's not, so yeah, this wouldn't, so as far as I can tell, then the Hare Krishna view is not going to be pantheism.
Right. Samuel was saying he reckons the Hare Krishna view is a combination of classical theism and panentheism.
If classical theism, as it's typically defined, affirms creation out of nothing, well, then there's no such thing as a mixture of the two. So if you look at the history of panentheists, just in the West, I'll stick with that. They're going to say no creation out of nothing. There's going to have to some kind of eternal creation or a series of successive universes that have always been going on forever and ever. Amen. And a lot of them will say, yeah, God's timeless, immutable, everything. So so the person, Karl Christian Friedrich Krauss, who was a German thinker who coined the term panentheism, and in intending it to be a rival to classical theism, he held to simplicity and timelessness and immutability and impassibility. But he was like, creation out of nothing, no, got to get rid of that.
So if we take classical theism and subtract creation out of nothing from it, we've now evacuated the term classical theism of any meaning.
That's as far as I can tell, yeah. At least that's what a lot of people in the Christian tradition, how they want to define it.
Because the distinction between classical theism and panentheism kind of relies on creation out of nothing.
Yeah. Then there's a bunch of wild gestures towards metaphors that are supposed to help differentiate them, but we're just talking about metaphors. I don't think that doesn't really help us get actual conceptual clarity.
If the use of metaphor is a thing that's done in continental philosophy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, a lot of people use metaphors, but I want to know what the metaphors are about. What is a metaphor for? And if they can't tell me that, then I don't know if it's an illuminating metaphor or it's a useful metaphor.
Right. And so what would, I mean, there's some time objections to conceptions of God too. I've heard you and others on YouTube talking about it, and I was there thinking, but we've got two different kinds of time, one for the material world and one for God and the spiritual world. Therefore, we can resolve those contradictions.
Yeah, because you'd mentioned this to me before. I guess the main thing is I don't know what that could possibly mean. Because I just don't think time could be disunified like that. I don't think you can have two separate timelines. Because it sounds like an overly spatialized view of time where I'm not talking about time anymore is the worry that I have.
So time, like in the material world where Krishna says, time, I am the destroyer of all, we understand time in the material world as this force that eventually destroys everything, and everything in the material world is, constantly edging towards its ultimate demise. Whereas in the spiritual world, this kind of time isn't there. There's Leela Shakti, would be what we might call time. Leela means pastime. So anything that you do, not because you have to pay your bills or to maintain your material body, is Leela. It's just done for bliss, and it's in a spiritual sense, not in the material kind of chasing pleasure like in the mode of passion. It's a different kind of thing. And it's fully spiritual. And so the Leela Shakti enables a kind of chronology, like in the morning, and then, breakfast time, and then they go to the woods, and then they come back from the woods. But it's not the kind of time that it's like, time wasted can never be got back. There's no such thing as, losing time in the spiritual world. Because
Ricardo had something he wanted to say.
Yeah, as far as I can say, the concept of time, the Indian concept of time, the word skala, is a different concept. It's much like a power that transforms things. It's not the passing, like an order of events. It's like the common way we understand the word time. Like this event came before that event, and so on and so forth. It's like a power of transformation. So and which makes things to deteriorate. And so in this way, in this spiritual realm, you don't have this time because things don't deteriorate. But this doesn't mean that we don't have events, we cannot organize chronologically the events and so on and so forth. As far as I can say,
I think it's right.
Is the same word, like we translate kala as time, but they are two different concepts.
Yeah. So from what I understand, what you've got going on here is an absolute theory of time that distinguishes between time and moments, and time is responsible for these moments. And it's also, in some sense, responsible for what's happening in the moments. And I think that's actually, I think that's really great. I think that's the right way to go. And so these two different times that you're talking about, though, those aren't really times strictly. They would just be like what's happening in time, and what's happening to the things in time. So it wouldn't really. So I think it just wouldn't be quite strictly accurate to talk about two different times, because you just have time and moments of time, and then what's happening in the moments is where are you bothered by what's happening, or like, are you totally blissed out by what's happening? That would just be talking about your experience.
And that's a very important issue, because we usually tend to, because we have different concepts, but we translate those concepts. I mean, and we understand concepts, of course, inside what we can call a theory. You cannot separate a concept from the context in which it is used. So you have a Sanskrit word that we translate as time or whatever, and we have a tendency to identify this concept with the Western concept of time or whatever. So I think we need to be really careful when we make those conceptual identifications.
Yeah, but with that though, it's almost midnight, so I'm out of time.
All right, cool. So thanks for coming on. I really enjoyed that. Well, might have to do it again. Sorry for the slightly late start. So there's a lot of comments on the live stream. I'm going to have to edit out a little bit at the beginning. And so the live comments are going to go. So if you want your comment to stay, you need to, when the live stream finishes, put it under the video. And thanks for tuning in. If you want to contact me on Facebook to carry on any of this discussion, you can look up Theology Unleashed there, or look at the links in the About section of the channel. I want to thank Dr. Ryan Mullins and Dr. Ricardo Silvestre for coming on. It was a great discussion, and we've got more of these coming up. And be sure.
Can I say a few words?
Sure. Yeah.
Can I say just 1 minute? Well, thank you again. It was a pleasure to meet you, Ryan. A very, very interesting discussion. And I'd like just to point out that, I mean, what we are really dealing here is an attempt to reconstruct the Hare Krishna concept of God. Because, on the Christian side, we have centuries, like people trying to figure out what is the Christian concept of God. So they went way out. I like what is said in the Bible, as Ryan confirmed. So we didn't have that on our side. So we still need time to try to do this reconstruction, and it's a great labor. It's not easy, because it takes time. It takes generations, I would say, but that's a kind of good start.
Any final words from you, Ryan?
No, I think that's accurate, because it's right. Like a lot of these other religious traditions, they've had centuries to work through this, and the Hare Krishnas haven't yet. So yeah, give them some more time and see what they can come up with.
Yeah, well, the Eastern traditions don't look at things in quite the same analytical way, and a lot of the things which are debated in the West, they were never even dreamed of being worthy of debate in the East. Like, it was always just assumed the Vedas are the authority. It was just always assumed that you need an ultimate explanation for reality. And so, that's a very different context. So we're pioneering this work of trying to articulate these ideas and arguments in the Western framework. That's why I termed it a Western perspective. And Dr. Silvestre was saying we should call it a philosophical perspective. But I would take the word philosophical in a much broader sense and include what went on in India for thousands of years as philosophical. It's just now we're doing it from a Western perspective and using the Western vocabulary and ways of analyzing. So yeah, again, thanks for tuning in. Be sure to leave us a comment and let us know what you think. We've got more of these discussions coming up. Dr. Stephen M. Barr has agreed to come on, so I'm doing an interview with him in about 2 weeks. We're going to talk about what I call the construction argument, which is, can you get something from nothing, or can you have strong emergence? Not something from nothing, but can you get categorically different qualities from things that lack those qualities? And so, yeah, thanks for tuning in. Now I'll go to our outro video. Hare Krishna. Click the cut.